What up, friends? There's trouble in my mind, and today we're going to be reviewing Foster the People's newest album, Paradise State of Mind. This is the fourth studio album by American indie pop band Foster the People. From their breakthrough hit Pumped Up Kicks from their 2011 album Torches to the very fun psychedelic pop stylings of their 2014 album Supermodel, Foster the People were actually doing some pretty nifty pop stuff that set them apart from their contemporaries at the time. However, I do think they kind of fumbled this momentum a bit with their next album, Sacred Hearts Club. The addition of the alt-rock and pop-rock stylings kind of muddied their sound a bit, making the album feel very inconsistent in comparison to the albums that came previously. It felt very messy and unfocused, and other than the singles, not a lot of the songs on there left much of an impression on me, to be honest. It wasn't a bad record per se, but it just didn't have a lot of staying power. However, they do seem to be getting back on track with this newest album here. It combined the very catchy pop aesthetics of 2011's Torches, while also adding the sort of psychedelic stylings that was present on 2014's Supermodel. They also combine all of this with a new disco spin, and I think this is a very hopeful sign of the band kind of experimenting again and actually having some fun and lush instrumentals that they added to their repertoire. In a way, it also kind of feels like them revisiting what made them good to begin with. See You in the Afterlife is an immediate strong start for the record, showing off all the things that we have been adding to Foster the People's sound, while also kind of calling back to that synthpop flair that was present on their earlier work. It has a very glittery and vibrant instrumental thanks to the very catchy guitar riffs and the spacey synths. The beat is also punchy as hell, and the song has a delirious charm to it that I think really fits the lyrics about how people in power will convince those underneath them to either vote or advocate for things that go against their best interests. Lyrics like, "Well, I used to go by Johnny, but now you can call me Jackie O," and how they relate to other lines like, "Today I woke up crying, so I went into a church to pray. They said, 'Excuse me, but you'll have to leave or we're calling security,' just show how religion has been politicized and how a trans person who is seemingly religious or is curious about it and how it could help them can't even go and pray in a church." It's pretty bold and well done and topical, which is kind of something that I don't really expect from Foster the People, but I'm really glad that they're actually doing something with that here. We also have lines like, "Well, it's a European summer and the skies are looking kind of mean. While I'm thinking of a holiday, what's the weather like in Kyiv?" Like, it's also just showing off and explaining this constant threat of war and how we're basically being desensitized to it. It's, again, very topical and different for Foster the People. I'm really digging it. Then again, with songs like Pumped Up Kicks, I guess they've always kind of had that aspect of being topical in a certain respect to them, so I'm glad to see them coming back to that. I actually think this song stands among their best. Lost in Space is a bit standard in comparison, but I also still think it's pretty good. It leans on the glamour of classic disco, while also infusing it with the distorted vocals and wobbly bass that you can expect from a synthpop song. While the instrumental is overall fairly simple in the verses, I am really digging how pining it gets as we get into the chorus as Mark's classic vocal tone comes in. It's this weird combination of pining and a triumphant feeling that is pretty unique. I'm also really loving the self-reflection in the lyrics here, as Mark basically talks about how he was looking for someone to complete him and find, his better half, but in reality, it's not about finding someone to complete you. You have to also give a piece of yourself in order to make this pairing work. You have to actually complete yourself first in order to give love away to somebody else, and I think that's a pretty interesting angle on love that we don't hear too much in pop songs. It's a balance that it seems like he had to learn the hard way, and I'm also really loving the melancholic piano during the bridge that also expresses this. It's a pretty simplistic song compared to some of the other ones on here, but I think it's pretty fun in its own way too. Take Me Back gets a bit funky with it, honing in on the groove of the in-your-face bass lines on this one, alongside these echoing guitar flourishes too. It also has a somewhat 90s R&B influence as well. It actually kind of reminds me of the US soundtrack of Sonic CD, like Tidal Tempest, which is definitely not what they were going for, but that's what it makes me think of. Seriously though, this one is slick, and I'm loving how playful the drums are on this one and how the strings interact with all the other elements here. While the lyrics do show some hesitation on becoming too enamored and trapped by the past, I also really like how it goes for a balance of it's okay to look back at what you were doing as a child and how life was a bit simpler back then and kind of take inspiration from that and kind of incorporate some of that innocence into your current self. Basically how you were less hard hard on yourself as a child, and that in act of being less hard on yourself will actually make you a happier adult. Let Go keeps the slower vibes going, although we are getting a bit more tropical and breezy on this one. It's fairly pleasant on the whole, however, I will say it's not as interesting as some of the other songs on the project. It is one of the weaker moments, I would say. The vocals are actually pretty engaging as they go for quite a few different vocal tones and ranges, which I think is pretty interesting for Mark actually. However, on a lyrical front, I do find it to be pretty repetitive. In addition, while I do love some of the elements like the string segments on this one, I actually find it to be a bit too similar to Take Me Back, which kind of prevents it from having its own identity. However, I will say that the bombastic outro on this one does help it stand apart at least a little bit. Feed Me has the band dabbling into some psychedelic pop territory, and this was a pretty fun one. The buzzing synth, the slick bass line, the weird-ass vocals, like this is going into some Gorillaz territory here. This track is super odd, but it actually does kind of remind me of some of the more off-kilter moments on like their earlier record like Torches, which I think is pretty cool. The piano and sound effects also really capture the swirling and manic touch that we find in the lyrics here. The lyrics in particular are talking about the parasocial behavior that can stem from being online, especially on places like social media, and how it can even transcend into like stalker territory at times. The track can actually be a bit unsettling at times, and I think because of this, Mark really nailed the delivery on this one and really helped relate the instrumental and vocal delivery to the lyrical topic. The title track, Paradise State of Mind, is also one of the best songs on the project, if not the best song. Like See You in the Afterlife, we are definitely going in that more new disco direction here. However, I'm really digging how they kind of combined it with a low-key instrumental here. It's kind of a low-key touch on the genre, which I think makes this song pretty unique. As the lyrics describe Mark trying to reach out, the song overall talks about how people are just afraid of living. From being afraid of judgment, from feeling like you have to have a reason to like something, or even feeling like you're too afraid to speak out against injustice. The delivery, the lyrics, and even the lush instrumental are basically just a crying plea for people to stop being numb to life. I'm also loving the bass, the lively keys, and the choir-like vocals on this one too. Like this is a sensation that we got going on here. That outro being a very dramatic and triumphant and even an explosive version of the chorus also kind of just shows that Mark is trying to be the change that he's talking about. He's feeling very free and true to himself. Next up we get to Glitchzig, and man, I really wanted to like this one, but it's probably the weakest song on the record for me, unfortunately. It has the weirdness of Feed Me, but kind of strays too far into that direction and kind of loops around into being annoying, unfortunately. And this is kind of the problem, because this problem is only present in the verses, because the chorus, I think, is really fucking good. Like, the chorus is excellent. The dramatic strings and the rhythmic drumming, like, it's just so good. And, you know, I do think the verses have some interesting elements, the piano especially, but it just feels like multiple different and separate songs stitched together. Nothing connects to each other all that well, and it feels like two distinct vibes going from verse to chorus that I just wish were more concise and actually fit better together. It just doesn't have that cohesiveness that Feed Me had. However, I will say that the horn outro is pretty killer on this one. Like I said, there's a lot of good to be had on this one, but it feels like the band just mashed 4 different songs together and called it a day, which is not my favorite thing. The Holy Shangri-La is also one of the best songs on here, taking the psychedelic pop sounds into an even smoother direction. I love the vocals on this one, especially as Mark goes into his lower register here, which is pretty rare actually, and the suaveness of that bass line just cannot be understated. It feels mystical and otherworldly, and the piano during the chorus is just incredible. The maracas are also a pretty unique effect on this one, and I'm just loving the curtain of sound that's present on this song. While the track does have some religious or like spiritual elements to it that I just don't really relate to, I do think the core message of the song being that it's okay to have something or someone to lean on as hope or inspiration or just something to help you actually get through life, it's pretty nice. I like that sort of lyrical angle that Mark's going for here. This also fits other moments on the record, as Mark on this album especially is talking about how you don't need to go through life alone. Unfortunately though, Sometimes I Want to Be Bad is just kind of there for me. It's not a bad song by any means, but in a weird way it actually just kind of feels like an epilogue or leftovers, if we're being a bit more critical. to the last song. Like, it just feels like an extension of it. I'm liking the horn segments on this one and how jovial that flute is here, but it just is a bit too easy listening for its own good. It also doesn't help that other songs on the project kind of just do everything that this one does, but better. Chasing Low Vibrations is the last highlight on the record for me, actually feeling like more of a final song than the actual final song of the record. The lighter touch on the new disco element on this track is just super sweet, and it has this sort of freeing airiness to it that I think is pretty nice. It makes it stand out, and the guitar and bass especially are super blissful. This is also very fitting for the lyrics, as they talk about how we have to push through the bad to actually create the future that we want. The chorus is also just incredible with how the bass takes on a life of its own, and the vocals are incredible on this part as well. It's like a super smooth celebration of life and all of its ups and downs, which I think is a super powerful presence, especially for how bouncy and summery this song is. Unfortunately though, like I said, the last track, A Diamond to Be Born, actually kind of pales in comparison to Chasing Low Vibrations. It's still decent, but man, it just does not have the fantastical vibe that the previous one did. It's kind of unfortunate too, because Chasing Low Vibrations summed up all of the album's elements in a really great way. However, with this one, it kind of just makes the album fizzle out a bit. I like how synth-heavy the instrumental break is, but lyrically and vocally, this song just doesn't really hold up. I get why this song is here, because it does definitely feel like an outro, but I'm just not the biggest fan of the distorted vocals on this one, and I just don't think this was the best note to end on in comparison to Chasing Low Vibrations. All that being said, I still dig this album quite a bit. New Disco is a surprisingly natural continuation of Foster the People's sound. I'm also really digging how they incorporated the psychedelic pop elements of Supermodel into this one too. The album was very vibrant and surprisingly intimate, even with the esoteric and sort of impersonal writing style. I think this was a pretty great lyrical album experience for Foster the People. In a way, I think the lyrical delivery and writing style actually reflects the sort of psychedelic and spacey charm of the record overall. There are some great soundscapes and vocals on this one, had a lot of variety to it as well, and I'm also really digging when they kind of went a bit off the wall and weird with it. However, when they lean more into the sort of standard synth pop instrumental styles, it does kind of pale in comparison a little bit to the new disco experimentation. And speaking of experimentation, sometimes in the case of songs like Glitchzig, it doesn't pan out in the most seamless way. Some songs also kind of blended into each other a little bit too much, or it felt like they were just kind of not as good versions of other songs on the project, and I will also say that the catchiness of the band's styles of instrumental and vocal deliveries, that was definitely toned down on this project. Because of this, if you're looking for a sort of pumped up kicks pop banger, you're probably not going to really find it on this album. Still though, despite some hiccups here and there in the experimentation and the album occasionally feeling a bit too samey, I think they did a really great job on this one and in experimenting with a new sound. This experimentation worked really well for them, and I think it worked way better than what they did on Sacred Hearts Club, so I hope they continue in this direction more going forward. All that being said, I'm feeling a strong 7 on Paradise State of Mind by Foster the People. Of course, we do still have to talk about album covers on this show, and this one, it definitely captures that psychedelic vibe of the project, that's for sure. It almost feels like an AI image. I don't even know if it is an AI image. If it is, that's kind of unfortunate, but if it's not, I do think this definitely captures the feeling of the record for sure. It's a psychedelic pop album. It has a fucking Salvador Dali styled cover, it's totally what you would expect from an album sound like this. So, I think the colors were very vibrant. They're obviously very in your face. They're weird. They're eclectic. That's exactly what they were going for with this sort of otherworldly and mystical album style. I just hope it wasn't AI, and I hope they actually got an artist to do this. But if they did, good on you. I like this cover if you did it. But of course, those are just my thoughts on this newest album by Foster the People. What did you guys think? Do you think this was a really good experimental step for them, kind of feeling this a bit more than you did with Sacred Hearts Club? Or is this also just not really capturing what made you like their earlier material? Let me know. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, and maybe you can end up in my mind, feeding into that parasocial aspect. But until the next one, farewell.